It being Thursday, the theme is innovation, and Martin will be talking to us shortly about the challenge and the upside to being present, which will be, I'm sure, very interesting. So, morning, Martin.
Morning, Phil. How are you?
I'm all good, all good. So as always, these sessions, thank you for coming along. The objective behind them is to try and give you an injection of new, relevant, interesting thinking so that you can start your day off well, and hopefully take some practical stuff out of this. We have a YouTube channel, and actually Martin has been doing some plastic surgery on our YouTube channel. So it now has a logo, it now has a different, I don't know what they're called, Martin, perhaps you can tell me, but different playlists in them, depending on theme. We also, tomorrow, we'll be setting live a Recession Rebellion page on the all-new corporatepunk.com site. So that's quite good. It'll just be a sort of page that sort of brings together not only the YouTube stuff, but also the 5-day fight back proposition, on some of the writing that we're doing around this and other useful resources for people. So that'll be going live over the next 24 hours as well. So plenty going on. As always, we are sort of slightly kind of building the runway at the same time as we fly the plane down it, but no bad thing. So as always, we'll do sort of 15, 20 minutes now. Martin will give us some stuff to think about. We'll open up for questions at the end. Please keep your thinking hats on as we go through this morning. It'd be great to get a really good quality of discussion going on in the last 5 or 10 minutes. So fire any questions at me in the chat. And Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Phil. So morning, everybody. I thought what we could do, well, first of all, this is what you voted for yesterday. So we're going to do that. So we're as good as our word as ever. So the mind hack, how we're going to look at innovation today is I'm going to do some deep mind work with you. So we're going to look at the challenge and the gains of being present. Literally, how can we be present? So the first thing I want to look at, one of my favorite philosophers, and Phil and I were speaking about this earlier, and this will be one of the tips that we follow up with you at the end as well, is Alan Watts. And Alan Watts had a test about being present, right? And this is how it works. So if you follow my finger, and I say at the end of my finger, I'm pointing at the moon. By the time you actually look there, if I am genuinely pointing at the moon, you'll see the moon, right? It's a really simple setup. And what he also said was that's easy enough. But if I ask you to follow my finger again, and by the time you get there, I'm telling you it's the present, but by the time you get to looking at the end of my finger, it's already the past, right? So it's a little bit of life is a bit of a haiku, if you like. And here's what I mean by that, is that the past is our experience, right? So that's how it works for us. It's also our memory. And that is basically how we inform our now, right? So we look a lot to the past very quickly, and that's how the neuroscience of decision-making actually works. So we've got our experience and we've got our memory. And they're actually two different things in the brain, and that might be a little bit confusing because you might say, well, my memory is my experience, but actually it's two different ways that we assign an understanding. So our memory tends to be more emotional and more sensory and more moments in time, literally. And our experience tends to be more of a knowledge base, meaning that we might learn how to tie our shoelaces, which I've mentioned a few times, right? And that might happen over a different period of time. And as we get older, we might make a slight modification to it. So it's actually a mass of different things that we experience that becomes our knowledge base together. That's the neuroscience of decision making, and that's how the positive side of how we use the past to inform the present. Now, the problem that we've got with that is that we all naturally abuse what is a very natural way. So our nature of how the brain works is to go into that experience and go into the past and inform what we can do now. Because I've spoken about many Thursdays, and I'll continue to drive this point home, is that the brain looks for as much automation as possible, and that automation means that we need to look at what we already know, because that helps us make quicker decisions and live within the now. The problem with that, though, is that thinking is a habit, so we're talking about automation, right? And in the chat, you'll find a podcast regarding this, literally about thinking as a habit. And we play the game of suffering with ourselves. This is where we start to abuse our nature. So anybody that sits there and they're beating themselves up about something that happened yesterday or 10 years ago or when they were 5 years old, consciously and unconsciously, this is the constant abuse that's way more common in pretty much every individual, in that in our darker moments, we're constantly beating ourselves up. Or for the vast majority of us, we've got one particular thinking pattern where we've got some doubt about ourselves, and that becomes the thinking pattern about it. So it becomes a fear, whether we're scared to get on stage or to socially interact with people, or it can just be tons of different things about that that means that we just do too much thinking in the present, where we're not affecting the present, we're just using the past that ends up wasting our time in the present. And that's what I want us to help us get past, right? Because we constantly criticizing that we cannot change. So if you think about what that actually means when I talk about abuse of selves, is we're sitting in the present and we're using the past to consistently beat ourselves up, saying that I can't do this, I'm not good enough to do this. Or for a lot of people, they're just beating themselves up, they're caught within the thinking pattern, they're not conscious of the time that they're in, and it means that they're just constantly hammering themselves, and it's got nothing to do with the present, it's just a thinking pattern. And if you think that sounds unusual, it's not. Tons of people do this kind of stuff. It's a big part of psychiatry. It's a big part of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. It's all about managing people and optimizing their thinking patterns. All is not lost, because the same is true when we look at the future, but it's not as bad as what we think, because we're constantly thinking about the unknown, right? So what you've basically got is two schools of people. Most people are either thinking too much in the past or they're thinking too much in the future. And the future can only be problem solved or strategized. If we're not in those modes when we're thinking about the future, right, we're either wasting our time because it doesn't need to happen, or we're generating anxiety for ourselves. And Phil and I were joking about this, not joking about anxiety, but we were joking about what's going on in the world at the moment, because we're caught in this little bit of a Groundhog Day scenario. Everybody gets up, hopefully they shower, and then they seem to sit in front of Zoom all day, every day. And I don't know about you, but for me, it's generating a lot of anxiety for me, because I'm just like caught. At times, I can have days where I feel like positive things have happened, but it still feels like mentally I'm treading water a little bit, because we're caught in this continuing pattern, and it's a bit too monotonous, and it's very hard to break ourselves out of it. So when we talk about the future, problem solving and strategizing makes a lot of sense from a business point of view. Anything else that you're doing, thinking about the future, is you're just overthinking it and you're wasting it. And it's exactly the same challenge of the past. And funnily enough, is that you get people that are either stuck thinking about the future too much, so they can't control the unknown, or they're stuck beating themselves up about the past. And generally people sit in one camp or the other camp. So what you've actually got is the same type of thinking pattern in the future, and it's the same type of thinking pattern in the past. And both of them are just abusing yourselves for things that you can't control. Here's what we can do about it. This is what's going on at the moment. This is actually a live video of Phil that was taken 2 days ago at home. I'm joking. The problem is that we can become self-fulfilling prophecies, right? Meaning that Phil has spoken a lot about this when he's given a lot of tips about leadership and about what we can do about these types of activities, is that if we believe the future is unknown and we can't control it, and our business is going to go to crap, or our career's not going to work out, or we're not going to have a job, we create these kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. And don't get me wrong, I know that there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of variables at the moment, and we can't control it all. But there is a very, very deep mind thing here, in that if you believe something is not possible because you're not good enough, because you made a mistake in the past, it will happen. If you believe that something negative is going to happen in the future and you're going to lose clients or you're not going to win business, it will happen. Because so much about what we do is we're looking to the future and we're looking to the past, but all that we're doing by doing that is looking for affirmation of why we're not good enough to do something. And I don't think that's good enough for anybody on this call. And that's what we can be. That's what I want to talk about today. So we become what we think, right? So positive thinking, we've spoken a lot about this, and I'm a huge believer in it. And it's not believing that everything is meadows and rainbows and sunshine and things like that. It's more about catching yourself and being able to be aware that positive thinking means that you're getting more grounded into the present, and you're looking at how can I be more about problem solving? How can I be more about strategizing? And I'm going to give you some tips about that as well. So being grounded in the present means more that you accept yourself. You understand that the situation that we're in right now, you can't change it, but you can optimize what you do and how you think, so that what you're thinking about is how can I turn this into an opportunity? What are the positives in it? So I'll use Phil and I as a case study. Again, nobody's paying us to do recession rebellion. Why are we doing it? Because we believe it'll be helpful for people. Does it help us? Yeah, absolutely. We get a lot of good feedback. It makes us feel better about what we do. And obviously, from a business point of view, where opportunity allows, we use the video content. I think the one that I did last week was probably been the most successful for me business-wise, because I was talking about the psychology of engagement, and we picked up 3 leads from that, not from people that were on the recession rebellion, but because my team are going out and then using that type of content. So we're turning lots of that situation into a positive for ourselves, which is just a good way to do things, to balance what you're actually doing. And as Alan Watts says, that if we don't turn things into a positive, it ends up being all wretched, no vomit. It never gets there, in his words. So we can spend our time thinking about, this is the past, I failed, I'm going to fail again because of that. This is the future, I can't control it, I can't understand it. Well, why are you thinking about it then? What we want to do is just get into the present, which is so much more difficult than what we think. Because as I said, right, if you follow my finger and you get to the moon, you see the moon. If you follow my finger this way and I tell you it's the present, by the time you get there, it's already the past. So we need to optimize how we think, because if we spend too much time thinking about the unknown, then we're going to end up creating these self-fulfilling prophecies, or we're just actually wasting time. So here's my tips for you. Number 1 is still the mind. Very, very genuine thing. And there's a number of different ways that you can do it. And here's why it matters. When we still the mind, that's when you have those moments of clarity. Stilling the mind means that you're not letting thinking patterns of the past or thinking patterns about the future invade what you're doing. So from my perspective, if you can meditate, if you can read, if you can box, if you can run, if you can buy some adult coloring books, and there's tons of these on Amazon, there's a Star Wars one for any geeks like me. There's a whole different varieties. And I mention all these things because a lot of people hear about meditation as a solution to everything. But there's tons of different ways to do it. For me, I do a lot of boxing. I've started doing more running as I've got older, and that's what stills my mind. And when I talk about stilling the mind, what happens is that I call it getting rid of mind junk. So when I'm running, as I did this morning before this webinar, is that I'm thinking about a 90-minute call I've got with my client later, and it allows me to filter out all of the mind junk so I can just focus on them, focus on the problem, and it allows lots of ideas to come to me. It's a real moment of clarity for me. So stilling the mind is a very genuine, positive thing. And for anybody that's a bit of a workaholic like me, is that I find that the running and the boxing and things like that is not me sacrificing away time from work. It's actually the opposite. It's when I get the best ideas. So you can optimize your time by doing things that is not sitting at your desk on Zoom calls every day. Thinking in the now. What does that actually mean? Don't let yesterday dictate today. So this is one of the biggest fallacies that we've got going on at the moment, is that a lot of your thinking can't be about yesterday, because your memory and experience of what you did in the past is not going to serve you right now. We're sitting in the middle of an unknown. And if you're constantly thinking in the now, not thinking in the now and letting yesterday dictate today or tomorrow rob you of what is most relevant, then you're just investing your time in things that don't serve you. So that investment just becomes a waste of time. This is what I mean about getting grounded in the present. The only way that you can reward yourself right now is thinking in other people's shoes, which takes us on to think but don't assume. So again, the brain's job is to automate things as much as possible, right? So it means that we humans make a lot of assumptions. And assumptions are a great way when we're living our normal day-to-day life, because it's like how you make a cup of tea, it's how you make a cup of coffee, it's how you dress yourself, it's how you do all those things. But assumption, especially right now, is how you can pull yourself down, because if you assume that everything that you've done and the way that you've done it is going to work right now, then you might be causing your own problems. So you're experiencing your memory as your current frenemy, really. The fourth part is walk a mile, right? So this is the number one thing that I'm always teaching salespeople when I had a sales training business, is that you have to think from the perspective of your customers and your employees, because it's a two-sided kind of component. And obviously there's different leaders with different roles on this, right? So you can pick one or the other, in my opinion, right? So I'm always thinking from the customer's perspective. And I can tell you that Phil is an absolute master at this kind of activity. He's one of the best people I've ever met, not just about how he wins business, because they've got a very proven and fantastic service at Corporate Punk, but he's really, really good at putting himself in the mindset of the business and how it's affecting employees and what the leadership model looks like. When you can think like that, you're eliminating your own bias, your own selfishness, your own assumptions about the past or thinking about the future. Walking a mile in somebody else's shoes can be very liberating. And the number one thing that I've found from a neuroscience and a psychology perspective is that we let our own bias dictate how we think other people think. And if we do that, it's going to cost you business, not just during the pandemic, but at all times. And my final tip for you is to be more Alan Watts. One of my favorite philosophers, this is in the chat as well. Listen to What If Money Was No Object. I'd love it if you listen to it straight after this podcast, because it's not about money in itself. It's more about your mindset and actually how you think. And it's a wonderful way to break free of any kind of traps that you've currently got yourself in with thinking. So I know that that was a huge raft of stuff that I was throwing at you, but the idea is, like with all the sessions that I do on Recession Rebellion, is just to get you thinking and start exploring yourself so that you can start setting yourself free. Because thinking about the past is not the worst thing. Thinking about the future is not the worst thing. It's all about how you're actually thinking about those things. So if you're trying to problem solve and strategize things that help you in the now, whether it's life or work, that's really positive. If you're thinking about the past to beat yourself up, to create a point of failure in the future, that's not a good thing. If you're thinking about the future and you're worrying about it, you're going to be generating your own anxiety, because all of these things need considered and they need thought about. But if you're wasting so much time that's just making you feel worse about yourself or worse about the future, then you're not serving yourself. And that's what it all comes down to. So that was us for today, Phil. Any questions?
Great. We have a couple actually, which we'll go through in a second. I think that was really, really useful, Martin. Thank you. I think I was reminded of, may have mentioned this a day or two ago, but I was reminded of a very good TED talk that I saw a week or two ago by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And she was talking about the paradox of human existence being that we have so much inner resourcefulness. We are the most resourceful species on the planet. But actually we also suffer extraordinary levels of anxiety about our inability to cope with change. And the fact that it is only when we are faced with the need to change, like we are at the moment with the COVID piece, that actually anxiety drops away. We tend to be very resourceful in the moment, but it's the thinking that creates the anxiety. And that really sort of came up for me in what you were talking about, Martin. So, is overthinking more prevalent now with COVID? Was the first question that came in.
Yes. Noelle and I recorded. So Noelle's one of my colleagues in my business. We recorded a podcast yesterday, like why is anxiety rising across the planet? So that'll be out tomorrow. So I'll share it in next week's Recession Rebellion. But it is rising. And the reason why it's rising is because the overthinking is about the future, right? We can't control what we don't understand. And if we think that all hell is breaking out, then all hell is breaking out inside our minds. So again, it's just about how we control what we're thinking about and making sure that this unknown is not dictating too much away from our freedom of thinking, really.
Good stuff. Another question came in. What factors do you consider to make decisions in the present with only limited information available? That's a good and tricky question. What factors do you consider to make decisions in the present with only limited information available?
So I think that you can only think about what you can control, right? So I'll give you an example about what I'm doing with myself and with my time at the moment is that I'm reducing the amount of Zoom calls that I'm doing because it's overloaded my brain. I'm being true to my strategy. So I'd lost this for about a week. So business is going well, it's growing, but my business is not set up to deal with small businesses and to deal with startups. We're mainly high growth businesses and enterprise. And I did some analysis of the previous 3 weeks, and there was 5 hours a week that I was putting into calls and activities that are not my main target market. And I looked at it and I realized that why I was doing it was that A, it helped me fill time, but it was robbing me of thinking space to do better work for the actual prospects and clients that I've got. And the second part is that it was just a little bit of fear. So for me, it's about looking at what you're doing and filling your time with valuable things that keeps you true to what your strategy is. Because my strategy is strong and it's good, but I realized that the COVID stuff, particularly from day 30 to 45, I'm always tracking the number of days, had thrown me a little bit off course, and there was a little bit of fear within the system about that. So the factors for me are, if you understand what you're good at, what your value is and what you do, whether it's as an individual or as a business, then you have to stick to it. But then the tip that I would add to it, if you think about Recession Rebellion, if you think about the campaigns that I've put together, if you think about why we're doing some great lead generation for my business at the moment, is we've anchored our business on helpfulness. So what we've done is said that we'll offer every potential MD and CEO that we deal with a complimentary problem solving session. People are more open to that, and we're getting more business from it, because right now people have got a little bit more time, but they don't want to admit that, but they're open to new knowledge and they're a bit scared about the future. So we're strategizing exactly around that. So that's my balance between the two. Be true to what you are, but recognize that the helpfulness in different ways that we can present that is always going to be a plus for you right now, because you'll see more and more content about people talking about brands that are more authentic are going to win. And I still believe that to be true. Like Bulgari have started doing a really, really cool sanitizer bottle that's still true to their brand, but they've donated that. Barber have been building, making gowns for the NHS. And then we did that session last week looking at Sainsbury's scoring a bit of a psychology own goal and Lego being good. So there's lots of stories like that coming out. I hope it was a great question. Hopefully that answered it, Phil.
I think I would just add one thing onto that point about brands that are authentic will do well. I would say brands that are authentically nice will do well. I think there are plenty of brands that actually have been purporting to be very nice for a long time, but their authentic self isn't actually that nice.
I'm there.
And they will suffer, and we all look forward to that. I think that Martin, your points about working from within your circle of influence can't be, overstated. And I think so much of what we've tried to reinforce through what we're doing in Recession Rebellion is really about, we can't control the nature of what's going on in the wider world at the moment. I mean, again, Elizabeth Gilbert made the point. She said, the virus has infected a number of people physically, a greater number of people economically, and almost everybody psychologically and emotionally. And I think it was interesting to think about the three kind of characteristics, or the three ways that virus has sort of affected all of our lives. And we can't influence any of that stuff, but we can influence our response. We have a choice about how we respond. We have a choice about what we do. And I think what you're pointing us to this morning, Martin, is getting out of our own way in that. So how is it that we continue to access that innate creativity and innate resourcefulness that's within all of us, and actually within all organizations? I mean, the core founding insight of corporate punk going back 5 years was that organizations have all the talent, all the energy, all the passion, all the intellect, all of the creativity that they need in order to be able to thrive. They're just uniquely good at getting in their own way. And and I think that thing about being present, organizations struggle with that as much, if not more, than individuals do.
Yeah, 100%. Any other questions?
No, I think we're all good. As always, very good feedback, Martin. Stellar job, somebody said, and then rewrote stellar, which was funny. I have another one here. In order to be present, it's just come in, literally just come in. In order to be present, do you first need to rediscover your authentic self? That is, focus on what you believe should be done rather than what conventional wisdom says.
You can't help the mind that doesn't want to be helped, right? So my answer to that question is actually yes and no, because if you want to go on a big journey of exploration, like I've been doing for 5 years, about awareness of self and that type of discovery and philosophy and all that kind of stuff, then absolutely do it. If you don't want to do that and you're just looking at ways that you can optimize how you think and what you do, then my tips are just to make it simple as possible, because you don't want to come away today thinking that you've got to change a million different things to succeed. That's not the advice for today. It's much more about, again, going back to the authentic self, understanding what problems you solve, being true to what that is, understanding your value, but making sure that helpfulness is playing a part in what you're doing today, because people are going to remember that for tomorrow. That would be my advice.
Spot on. So that's all we've got time for today. Hang on. We have one more. We'll do one more minute and then we'll wrap up. Thomas Heatherwick says, we tap into our inner resourcefulness when we embrace constraints. We're now experiencing extraordinarily tight constraints. So if we embrace these constraints, we can problem solve are ways out of it. Do you agree?
I'll answer that with my own bias because I'm pure sales, right? And that's what my background was beyond the mathematician, psychology, blah, blah, blah. So I'm always thinking from the customer's perspective. It's something that I've trained myself about. So those constraints for me are what's going on in the customer's mind, what's holding them back at the moment, where does opportunity sit? So for me, a lot of my messaging is about revenue protection as much as growth. It's about growing loyalty. It's about the psychology of loyalty. It's about generating feelings. It's about problem solving. So that's the constraints that I think within. I don't think that everybody should think that they have to think about constraints or the most difficult situations. I think it's more about looking inside yourself, first of all, and just saying, is what I'm doing serving me? Like my thinking, my actions, my behavior, because thinking is a habit. And I think that that's the balance that I would want everyone to look at. And then the final thing for me about constraints is everybody just take that link, go and listen to that Alan Watts video. It's only 3 minutes long, and I guarantee you it'll get you a much better Thursday.
Any time spent with Alan Watts is never time wasted. The Watercourse Way is also a brilliant book and totally worth a read. As always, thanks very much, Martin. A really good start to a Thursday, that. And thank you, everybody, for coming along and joining us on, was this week 6 or 7, Martin? I think 6, wasn't it?
6, yeah.
Week 6 of the webinar series. All good. Next week, we've got me on Tuesday, which I will be, as usual, bringing my customary fire and brimstone to issues about how do we become more responsive in organisations. On Wednesday next week, we've got a very lovely lady called Judy joining us from a company called Roche Martin that specialise in emotional intelligence and psychological profiling psychometric tools that look at things like emotional intelligence and their application in the workplace. So that will be a really interesting session on Wednesday. Martin will be back with us on Thursday. In the meantime, as I say, you'll find all the webinars on YouTube. Share. I kiss your face if you share. That's always very grateful for that. And thank you as ever for coming along, and we will see you next Tuesday. So have a very, very good rest of the week, everybody, and thanks for joining us.